The United Nations has warned that Gaza is being strangled by Israel's week-long siege and aerial bombardments. The death toll in the Gaza Strip has climbed to over 2,700, while the Israeli authorities are claiming that 199 people are held hostage by Hamas in the region. The situation is dire as Israel's defense forces continues to urge people to evacuate northern Gaza. The Egyptian foreign minister has said that Israel is blocking Egypt's Rafah border crossing with Gaza, where thousands have amassed in order to flee. In the latest, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh has warned military actions that aim to displace the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip.
يحذر مجلس الوزراء من الأمر العسكري الرامي لتهجير أهلنا في قطاع غزة وصناعة نكبة جديدة، ونؤكد أن شعبنا لن يترك أرضه ولن يهاجر منها مهما غلت التضحيات، وأنه قادر على مواجهتها وإفشالها، كما أفشل العديد من المشاريع التصفوية والتوطين على طول حقب النضال الماضية.
Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry has said that Hamas may be ready to release hostages if Israel stops airbombing Gaza. While on the ground, the fate of aid deliveries and evacuation of over 1 million people living in Gaza hangs in the balance. United Nations aid chief is heading to West Asia to negotiate humanitarian aid being allowed inside Gaza. Ahead of his visit, the United Nations said they were in deep negotiations with both sides. Egypt has blamed Israel for not making its position clear on opening the Rafah crossing from Gaza for entry or exiting of people from the conflicted area. Amid Israel's vow to end Hamas, there's a risk of a long-drawn regional conflict. Diplomatic efforts to address the crisis are intensifying. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is back in Israel today and is currently meeting the Israeli Prime Minister in Jerusalem. He is also expected to meet with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and opposition leader Yair Lapid. This comes in the backdrop of his several meetings with Arab states over the past several days in what is being called America's shuttle diplomacy. The Israeli Defense Forces has blamed Iran for sidetracking its war efforts in southern Gaza by instructing Hezbollah to attack the Lebanon border.
חיזבאללה מימש אתמול מספר פיגועי ירי על מנת לנסות ולהסיט את המאמצים המבצעיים שלנו מהדרום. זאת בהנחיה וגיבוי איראני תוך סיכון של מדינת לבנון ואזרחיה.
In response, Iran has denied these accusations by pointing the gun at the United States, saying that America should be held accountable for Israel-Palestinian conflict.
دولت امریکا باید پاسخگوی جنایات رژیم صهیونیستی باشد. این دولت آمریکاست که با تمام توان اکنون در حمایت از رژیم صهیونیستی علیه ملت فلسطین و ملت مظلوم فلسطین قرار گرفته. گسیل ناوگان نظامی به آبهای منطقه‌ای معنا و مفهومی جز حمایت یک جانبه و یک طرفه از متجاوز و از ظالم در مقابل مظلوم.
United States President Joe Biden has expressed his support for Israel but has warned that Israel's reoccupation of Gaza will be a big mistake. The siege, which has been criticized by human rights groups, came in response of a surprise assault by Hamas on October 7th. The time is ticking due to the lack of essential supplies in the region. The UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, has said its aid workers will no longer be able to continue humanitarian operations in the Gaza Strip unless new supplies are allowed into the enclave. The conflict so far has claimed at least 4,000 lives and continues to mount as time progresses. The WHO says 60% of casualties in Gaza have been women or children. Retired Colonel Rich Outzen is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. He is now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Colonel Rich, welcome to the show. Just an hour ago, a major development came from Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has indicated in the Knesset that Israel will allow aid to Gaza. This comes as hundreds thronged the crossing in Rafah in efforts to cross over to Egypt. But there is a problem. Egypt controls the crossing under a 2007 agreement with Israel. It's the only way out for Gazans, by the way. Egypt government says they cannot do anything at the moment. What is Egypt afraid of? Could Cairo be convinced to allow Palestinians to cross?
Eric, it's good to be with you. I think Egypt's concerns and that of other Arab countries that are in coordination and communication with Egypt have to do with mass movement rather than the movement of small numbers of third country nationals. For instance, the United States has been working to get an agreement for dual citizens, Palestinians who are also American citizens, to be able to exit through the crossing. And I think Egypt has a number of concerns about if that flow of people becomes too large. First of all, you don't know for a fact if thousands and thousands come across that there's not going to be some Hamas militants among those who are crossing, and that's a threat to Egypt as well as to others who oppose Hamas's terrorist activities.
Right.
Egypt supports the Palestinian people, but not Hamas per se. And the second threat is that neither the Egyptians nor any of the Arabs want to see mass movement of Palestinians out of Gaza. Why? Because they're afraid that they'll never be let back in and that this will become a de facto ethnic cleansing.
Colonel Rich, okay, now we've talked about Egypt. What about these other Arab countries in the Middle East? Most of them are rallying behind Palestinians or Gaza, but why is it hard for them to allow refugees into their own territories? What's the problem there?
Well, certainly for the Gulf countries, there's already large populations of Palestinians in them. With the exception of Saudi Arabia, if you look at the Gulf countries, for instance, so Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and so forth, they have actually a very delicate demographic balance where there are a minority of the entire population comprised of the putative nationality. I think in Qatar, for instance, it's less than 10% of the people in Qatar are Qatari nationals born and raised and citizens there, and then 90% are expat workers. Jordan's another interesting example where over half the population is actually ethnically Palestinian. So I don't think any of the Arab countries want to see the political rights of the Palestinians in Gaza or the West Bank forfeited by their departure from the territory. They're also worried about demographic change in their own countries from large numbers of Palestinians coming in.
Colonel Rich Outzen, stay with me because I want to get the latest updates from Israel, and our correspondent Sidhan Sibol has been following the latest updates from Israel. He is now joining us on the line. Sidhan Sibol, good to hear you, and I believe you're safe. What's the latest at this hour from your end? Sidhan Sibol, if you can hear me, what's the latest on your end? Sidhan Sibol, we'll try and get our correspondent Sidhan Sibol.
I can hear you, Eric. I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
You can hear me now. Great. I believe you're safe. What's the latest from your end?
Well, Eric, right now we are moving back towards Tel Aviv, even as it's evening time here, and of course during the night time it's not safe to be in southern Israel, even as we have seen what happened earlier today. But today we saw a lot of barrage of rockets towards central Israel, Tel Aviv, and also towards Jerusalem. Also, we know that today the Prime Minister of Israel spoke in the parliament. He talked about, of course, Hezbollah and warning them not to open another front. This happening at a time when we know that essentially that how situation has been dynamic. We have been all through the day, we have been in Zerot, and we saw essentially how situation was fluid. There were several times we heard alarms, sirens go on, and we also heard that how there have been troop movements. We spoke to a number of officials. One thing that has also emerged on the diplomatic front is that Iran has said that Hamas is willing to release the hostages, provided the Israelis stop their pounding of Gaza Strip. Now, Israelis have made it clear that they have to take action against Hamas hideouts. And for the Israeli Prime Minister as well, this is a major test because remember that there is a lot of public anger, especially when it comes to the hostages as well. 1,300 Israelis have died in the worst attack the country has seen. So essentially, the Israeli Prime Minister will be doing some major action. What will be that action is something that will be closely watched.
All right, that is our principal diplomatic correspondent, Sidhant Sibol, who's traveling to Tel Aviv from Sderot. Sidhant Sibol, stay safe and thank you. Colonel Rich Artzen, coming back to you, the rhetoric has now changed to a possible human catastrophe if Israel does proceed with its ground offensive. Even the US president is warning this could happen. What, if anything, can stop Israel, in your view? And will Israel listen?
Well, I think Israel has a number of different considerations to take in. I don't think they're anxious to go in for a full reoccupation of Gaza. I think that can be stopped because it would also come at high cost to Israel, not just in terms of the 199 or more hostages that are being held there, but also the type of fighting if Israeli forces go into urban centers like in Gaza City and the other big populated areas within Gaza itself, of which there are 4 or 5. So I don't think they're anxious to do that. I think their goal is to topple Hamas from its ability to rule Gaza. That might require the occupation of certain areas within the Strip for military operations and controlling the Philadelphia corridor between Egypt and Gaza. I think the two things they can turn off would be a full-fledged reoccupation of the entire Strip. I think even they don't really want to do that, so they're listening to what the international community, the United States, can do to put pressure on Hamas without that. And the second thing is I think they can be dissuaded from continuation of the siege. The humanitarian impact of cutting off water, electricity, and food and other aid is, of course, unconscionable for the Israelis over the long term, as it is for much of the international community. And that's why we see pressure growing for them to ease that siege. I think that's not going to be, that they're not trying to starve the people into submission. They are showing that there's a cost to Gaza for allowing Hamas to rule at the same time that Hamas is executing terror operations. With that point proven, I think they will back off and allow some import of international aid and support.
Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation, retired Colonel Rich Artzen, great talking to you, and thank you very much for talking to WION World is One today.
Good to see you, Eric. Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.